Like the other members of the committee, I think there's little doubt that war crimes have been committed by Russians in Ukraine. I have to say, though, I think there's an element of putting the cart before the horse here. Before there can be accountability for these crimes, there has to be victory in the war. And we're not on the verge of victory in the war because Joe Biden has been pussyfooting for the last year, not providing Ukraine with the weapons that they need to win this war. In fact, not providing the weapons they need to defend the territory where some of these crimes have been committed before Ukraine took that territory back. So rather than continuing to say that we're going to support Ukraine for as long as it takes, we should be focused on helping them win as quick as we can. Now, Ms. Monaco, I know you're not in charge of the conduct of our policy of the war, but rather on the crimes itself. But I just want to make that point, that until the war is won, there's very unlikely to be accountability for these crimes. I want to turn my attention to something for which you do have responsibility, though. There's a statute, a criminal statute, Section 1512, entitled Tampering with a Witness, Victim, or Informant. Most of that statute focuses on the altering, destruction, or hiding of records to be used in official proceeding. Ms. Monaco, are you aware of this statute?
Yes.
Do you know when it was adopted?
It was adopted, if memory serves, after the financial collapse of Enron and other corporate malfeasance.
In 2002, after the Enron scandal and a law called the Corporate Fraud and Accountability Act of 2002. It also includes a catch-all phrase prohibiting not just the destruction, hiding of evidence, but also any acts that, quote, otherwise obstruct, influence, or impede an official proceeding. The department is currently using that catch-all provision to prosecute hundreds of Americans for their actions on January 6, 2021 on the grounds of the United States Capitol. I want to be clear, I'm not talking here about persons who committed violent acts against law enforcement officers or destroyed property. There's plenty of federal crimes that cover their actions, but rather this catch-all phrase for people who in some cases were merely present on the Capitol grounds, maybe not even aware that that had been cordoned off earlier in the day. Are you aware of a case called U.S. v. Fisher in the D.C. Circuit, Ms. Monaco?
I'm not specifically familiar with the facts of it, but I think it's one of the cases brought in relation to the events at the Capitol.
Yeah, it was decided a couple weeks. It was decided a couple weeks ago on a sharply divided panel in which the department almost lost, in which there was strong dispute on what that catch-all phrase meant about otherwise obstructing or influencing an official proceeding. And it allowed the case to go forward, but said that they have to prove corrupt intent. There's a strong dissent that said clearly the items in that law that precede the catch-all phrase, like destroying or concealing documents, should limit the meaning of otherwise obstructing or influencing a proceeding. I'm following the case closely. I wouldn't be surprised to see if the Supreme Court reverses it on review, or if the department can't prove the mental element of corrupt intent. Your Department of Justice argued, though, that corrupt, quote, encompasses all forms of obstructive and influencing behavior. That's a pretty sweeping interpretation of the law. Just this week, the House Judiciary Committee held a hearing in New York City, and it's been reported that a Democratic mob was in the hallway trying to get in through the doors and stop that hearing from proceeding. Has your department begun to investigate this effort to obstruct or influence the official proceeding of the House Judiciary Committee in New York City?
Senator, I'm not aware of those events, although I do know that that hearing took place. I'm not going to comment on, as you rightly pointed out, that statute and those cases, and indeed the Fisher case is one that is moving through the courts. I'm not going to comment on the application of it to those particular facts or more broadly, precisely because those are cases that are moving through the courts and are important cases.
Well, there's no case in New York moving through it. I'm simply asking if the Southern District of New York has stood up a task force to investigate all these people who corruptly influenced and obstructed proceeding of the House Judiciary Committee.
The men and women of the Justice Department that have been pursuing and bringing the cases of the events that occurred in the Capitol have been doing incredible work. This is the most far-reaching,
I didn't ask about that task. I asked about a task force in New York. Let me ask you about another one. What about in Tennessee? A Democratic mob obstructed the Tennessee legislature recently to such a severe extent that the legislature expelled 2 of its members. Is the Department of Justice investigating all those protesters who disrupted the official proceeding of the Tennessee legislature?
I'm not aware of any such investigation, but I also wouldn't be able to comment on it if there was one.
You see where I'm
Senator,
going with this? Like
I
Senator
do,
Lee,
Senator.
like Senator Lee said, there also your department directed marshals not to arrest Democratic mobs outside the homes of conservative Supreme Court justices, specifically directed them not to conduct any arrests, even though they were clearly violating the black letter of the law. There's no dispute that they were clearly violating the black letter of the law. In case after case after case, the department enforces the law against its political opponents and does not enforce the law against favored political interest groups.
Respectfully, Senator, the Attorney General was very clear. He directed the Marshal Service.
The Attorney General very clearly lied in that committee, as Senator Britt demonstrated later by the slides that she produced.
Respectfully, Senator,
the marshals
Attorney
were
General
directed not to arrest protesters outside of the homes. These were not criminal masterminds. They broadcast on social media when they were going to be violating the law, and there's not a single arrest, much less a prosecution. Meanwhile, you've stretched the meaning of a corporate document retention law to prosecute hundreds of people who were merely present on Capitol grounds on January 6, 2021.
Senator, would you like to respond?
I would like to respond, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. The Attorney General was forthright, was clear about the direction he gave to the U.S. Marshal Service. The Marshal Service Director was also clear that he has received that direction repeatedly. So I wanted to put that on the record. I also would like to point out that the men and women of the Justice Department who are investigating acts of violence, especially that occurred at the Capitol, are doing so sometimes at great personal sacrifice and peril to themselves, and I'm proud to serve with them.
Senator Hirono?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because there are some concerns